You know what they say about Monday mornings in space? They're exactly as miserable as Monday mornings on Earth. Except now you get to deal with broken gravity generators and alien coffee makers that brew liquid disappointment. My name is Jake Morrison, and I run the only repair shop on Epsilon 7, which is basically the armpit of the galaxy. Think of it as a truck stop, but instead of truckers, we get smugglers, traders, and the occasional tourist who took a very wrong turn somewhere near the Andromeda exit. I was elbow deep in a Zephyrian espresso machine, cursing whoever designed a coffee maker that required 17 different types of screwdrivers, when my perfectly ordinary, completely predictable day decided to take a hard left into Crazy Town. The first sign something was wrong was the sound. Picture a freight train having an argument with a blender, then multiply that by the volume of a rock concert. The second sign was my shop door exploding inward like it had personally offended someone with anger management issues. Through the smoke and debris stepped something that definitely wasn't in my repair manual. 8 feet tall, covered in midnight blue scales that shimmered like oil on water, with wings that barely fit through what used to be my doorframe. Oh, and did I mention the claws? Because there were claws, lots of them. The dragon, because let's call a spade here, was cradling something small and limp against her chest. Her eyes, which were the color of liquid gold and about as warm as a tax audit, locked onto mine with the kind of desperation that usually meant my repair bill was about to get very, very expensive. Great, I muttered, setting down my sonic screwdriver and wondering if my insurance covered acts of desperate alien mothers. Just great. Because what my day really needed was a dragon with what I'm guessing is not a warranty claim. The dragon opened her mouth, revealing teeth that could probably cut through hull plating, and spoke in a voice like gravel mixed with honey. You are the fixer, yes? The one who makes the dead things live again? I looked around my shop, taking in the shelves of spare parts, the workbenches covered in half-dissected appliances, and the sign that clearly read Morrison's Mechanical Repairs, no job too small. Apparently, someone had forgotten to add, no dragons, no exceptions. Lady, I fix toasters and air scrubbers. You want a veterinarian, not a mechanic. But she stepped closer, and that's when I saw what she was holding. A baby dragon, no bigger than a house cat, its tiny chest barely rising and falling. Its scales were dull, lifeless, and there was something wrong with its breathing that didn't take a medical degree to recognize. All doctors say no hope, she said, and her voice cracked like breaking glass. But I hear stories. Human who fixes the unfixable, who brings life back to the broken. I stared at her, then at the dying hatchling, then at my perfectly normal repair shop that had somehow become ground zero for interspecies medical drama. Ma'am, with all due respect, I think someone's been telling you some very creative lies about my skill set. The dragon, who introduced herself as Vextra in a voice that suggested she was used to people doing what she asked the first time, wasn't buying my protests. She moved closer, and I got a better look at the little dragon in her arms. Pipe, she called him, and the name was so ridiculously cute, it almost made me forget I was dealing with a species that could probably barbecue me without breaking a sweat. Mining operation on Kepler 442b, she explained, her English getting more broken as her desperation grew. They dump toxins in water. My Pep, he drink before I know. Poison burns through his systems like acid through metal. She gestured wildly with one wing, nearly taking out my parts shelf. Doctors on Centauri Prime, they scan him, shake heads. Doctors on New Geneva, same thing. They say his biomechanical organs are too damaged, too complicated. They say let him die with dignity. Biomechanical organs. Now that caught my attention, though I tried not to show it. See, dragons aren't just big lizards with attitude problems, they're living machines. Their organs part biological, part technological. Evolution's way of saying why choose, when it came to efficient design. But I no give up, Vextra continued, her golden eyes blazing. I hear whispers in trade stations. Crazy human on Epsilon 7, who fix impossible things. Who make hybrid systems work when everyone else says impossible. Look, I appreciate the vote of confidence, really I do, I said, backing up slightly as she leaned forward. But there's a pretty big difference between fixing a broken hyperdrive and performing surgery on a dying dragon. Like medical school levels of difference. Pip chose that moment to make a sound that was half wheeze, half mechanical whir, like a tiny engine trying to turn over on a cold morning. His little chest stuttered, and for a second, I thought he'd stopped breathing entirely. Vextra's composure cracked completely. Please, she whispered, and the word came out like a prayer. I bring him across 3 systems. You are last hope, I pay anything, do anything. Just save my youngling. I looked at Pip again, really looked this time. His breathing was definitely mechanical, but there was something organic about the rhythm too, like a heartbeat and a piston cycle trying to sync up and failing. The toxins hadn't just poisoned him, they'd thrown his entire biomechanical system out of whack. And here's the thing about being a mechanic, especially one who specializes in hybrid systems, you develop an instinct for how things are supposed to work, even when those things happen to be small, dying dragons. I'm not a doctor, I said slowly, my brain already starting to analyze the problem, despite my better judgment. No, Vextra agreed, clutching Pip tighter. You are better, you are fixer. So there I was, staring at a dying baby dragon and his desperate mother, with my perfectly reasonable Monday morning having devolved into what I can only describe as the universe's idea of a practical joke. But here's the thing about being the only mechanic on a space station full of broken things, you develop a soft spot for lost causes. Alright, I said, and immediately regretted it. Alright, but I want it on record that this is the stupidest thing I've ever agreed to do, and I once tried to repair a black hole generator with duct tape. Vextra's face lit up like a supernova, which would have been touching if I wasn't busy calculating the 17 different ways this could go horribly wrong. First things first, I continued, clearing off my main workbench and trying to ignore how insane this was. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Dragon physiology isn't exactly covered in Mechanical Engineering 101. I gently took Pip from his mother, which was like handling the world's most expensive, scaly, potentially explosive piece of equipment. The little guy was lighter than I expected. His scales warmed to the touch but with an underlying vibration that felt distinctly mechanical. Okay buddy, I murmured, settling him on a cushioned examination pad I normally used for delicate circuitry. Let's see what's going on under the hood. Using my diagnostic scanner, the same one I used to check power flow in fusion cores, I started mapping Pip's internal systems. What I found was absolutely fascinating, and completely terrifying in equal measure. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle, I whispered, studying the readouts. Vextra, your kid isn't just biomechanical, he's got a full hybrid circulatory system, dual-chamber heart with backup power cells, and what looks like, is that a miniature fusion reactor where his liver should be. Dragon children need much energy to grow, she explained, hovering over my shoulder like the world's most intimidating helicopter parent. We evolved to process both organic nutrients and direct energy. Right, because regular digestion is for amateurs, I muttered, pulling up more scans. The toxins had basically turned Pip's internal systems into a war zone. His biomechanical components were fighting each other instead of working together, like someone had crossed the wires on a complex machine. Okay, here's my professional assessment, I announced, putting on my best doctor voice despite having exactly zero medical credentials. The toxins didn't just poison him, they corrupted his system integration protocols. His organic and mechanical parts are out of sync. I started gathering equipment, my mind racing through possibilities. In theory, and I cannot stress enough how theoretical this is, I might be able to recalibrate his systems using the same principles I use for hybrid engines. From my supplies, I pulled out a portable medical unit I'd repurposed for equipment diagnostics, a plasma welder with precision settings, several feet of biocompatible tubing I normally used for coolant systems, and a device that was technically a power flow regulator but looked suspiciously like surgical equipment if you squinted. This is either going to work, I said, assembling my improvised medical setup, or I'm about to become the first human to accidentally perform an alien autopsy with power tools. Vextra watched with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for defusing bombs or watching paint dry in zero gravity. What you need me to do? Pray to whatever dragon gods you've got that I'm not about to make this situation infinitely worse, I replied, calibrating the plasma welder to its lowest, most precise setting. Also, maybe stand back a bit. This is either going to be medical history or a really spectacular failure, and I'd prefer not to take you down with me. I looked at Pip, then at my jury-rigged medical contraption, then at Vextra's hopeful expression. You know what the really crazy part is, I said, firing up the equipment. I think this might actually work. Famous last words, right? But there I was, standing over a dying baby dragon with a plasma welder in one hand, and what was essentially a glorified car diagnostic tool in the other, about to attempt the galaxy's first cross-species mechanical surgery. Okay Pip, I whispered, adjusting the scanner to monitor his vital signs. Let's see if we can get your engine running smooth again. The first step was mapping his power flow. Dragons, it turns out, have what I can only describe as biological circuit boards running through their bodies. Pip's were flickering like a bad neon sign, the toxins causing shorts and feedback loops throughout his system. Vextra, I need you to keep his organic functions stable, while I work on the mechanical side, I said, handing her a modified oxygen regulator. This will help his breathing stay regular, while I'm poking around in his power systems. She took the device with surprising gentleness for someone with claws that could shred steel. You sure you know what you're doing? Absolutely not, I replied cheerfully, making the first micro-incision with the plasma welder. But I'm really good at figuring things out as I go. The first challenge was accessing his primary power coupling without damaging the surrounding organic tissue. It was like performing brain surgery inside a running engine. One wrong move and I could fry his entire nervous system. Come on, I muttered, using a modified fiber optic cable to get a visual on his internal systems. Where are you hiding, you little? There. His main power distribution node was about the size of a marble, nestled between what looked like a lung and definitely wasn't. The toxins had caused a buildup of corrupted bioelectrical energy around it, like sludge in a fuel line. Found the problem, I announced, trying to sound more confident than I felt. His power distributor is clogged. I need to flush the system and recalibrate the flow regulators. Using a technique I developed for cleaning plasma conduits, I carefully inserted the biocompatible tubing and started a gentle suction process. The corrupted energy came out looking like liquid static, crackling and sparking as it hit the containment unit. That is not supposed to come out of living thing, Vextra observed, her voice tight with worry. Yeah, well, most living things don't run on fusion power, I replied, watching Pip's readings start to stabilize slightly. Your kid's basically a biological starship. The rules are a little different, but then his secondary systems started failing. The cleanup of his primary power node was causing cascading failures throughout his network. His biomechanical heart stuttered, his breathing became irregular, and my improvised monitors started screaming warnings. Oh no, I said, sweat beading on my forehead. Pip buddy, you gotta stay with me here. I grabbed a power cell from my spare parts bin and rigged up an emergency bypass, essentially jump-starting his heart like I would a dead battery. The plasma welder became a makeshift defibrillator. The tubing system turned into artificial circulation, and I found myself using kitchen tongs from my lunch kit to manipulate components too small for my regular tools. This is insane, I muttered, watching 3 different diagnostic screens while manually regulating his breathing with a modified bellows system. I'm performing surgery with spare parts and cookware, but you know what? It was working. Slowly, carefully, I cleaned out each of his power nodes, recalibrated his biomechanical interfaces, and restored proper energy flow throughout his system. His scales started to brighten, his breathing became more regular, and the mechanical whirring in his chest settled into a steady, healthy rhythm. How is he? Vextra asked, leaning over my shoulder as I made the final adjustments. Better, I said, not daring to celebrate yet. Much better. His systems are synchronizing properly now, and the toxin corruption is clearing out. And that's when everything went sideways. Pip's readings suddenly spiked, every monitor I had started flashing red, and his tiny body began convulsing. The careful balance I'd established was falling apart, and it looked like all my work had been for nothing. What happening? Vextra cried, her voice breaking. I don't know, I shouted back, frantically adjusting settings and checking connections. Something's wrong, something I missed. Pip's biomechanical heart gave one last strong beat, and then flatlined completely. For about 10 seconds, the only sound in my shop was the steady soul-crushing beep of flatlining monitors. Vextra made a sound that was part roar, part sob, and entirely heartbreaking. I stared at the readouts, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. No, I said, grabbing the plasma welder again. No, come on Pip, don't you dare give up on me now. I tried everything. Emergency power injection, manual heart stimulation, even a desperate attempt at CPR adapted for dragon physiology. Nothing. The monitors stayed flat, Pip remained motionless, and I felt like the biggest failure in the galaxy. I'm sorry, I whispered to Vextra, my voice cracking. I'm so sorry, I thought I could. That's when I noticed something weird. Well, weirder than usual. The plasma residue from my welding work was glowing. Not just the normal blue-white of ionized gas, but with strange colors that seemed to shift and pulse, and it was concentrated around Pip's power nodes, like his body was somehow absorbing it. Vextra, I said slowly, checking my scanner readings. What exactly happens when young dragons are exposed to high-energy plasma? She looked up from where she'd been cradling Pip's still form. What you mean? I mean in the wild, where would a dragon hatchling encounter concentrated energy like this? I gestured to my improvised surgical setup, still crackling with residual power. Her golden eyes widened. The awakening pools, she breathed. On Homeworld, young dragons must swim in plasma pools, formed by volcanic activity. It triggers the great change, when their biomechanical systems fully integrate. But Pip too young, too weak. You thought he'd die before he could undergo the natural process. I finished, pieces clicking into place. But what if the toxins weren't just poisoning him? What if they were triggering an early metamorphosis that his system wasn't ready for? I frantically recalibrated my scanners, looking deeper into Pip's cellular structure. There, hidden beneath the damage I'd been trying to repair, were new pathways forming. Microscopic conduits that weren't there before, power channels that looked like they were growing, rather than degrading. The plasma exposure from my welding, I said, excitement building despite the circumstances. It's not killing him. It's completing a transformation that the toxins started but couldn't finish. As if responding to my words, Pip's chest gave a tiny flutter, not his old mechanical heartbeat, but something new. Something that sounded like a fusion reactor coming online for the first time. His power system is completely reorganizing itself, I explained, watching the readouts in amazement. The toxins damaged his original biomechanical integration, but they also triggered evolutionary adaptations. My crude surgery didn't just clean out the damage, it provided the energy catalyst he needed to complete the change. Pip's scales began to shimmer, not with their original blue, but with an iridescent quality that seemed to contain actual light. His breathing steadied, but now, it had a harmonic quality, like a perfectly tuned engine. But why he stopped breathing? Vextra asked, hope creeping back into her voice. Because his old respiratory system was shutting down to make room for the new one, I said, pointing to the scanner display. Look at this, he's developing what looks like a plasma processing organ. He'll still breathe air, but he can also directly metabolize energy now. Pip's eyes fluttered open, and instead of the dull gold they'd been before, they now glowed with a soft, steady light. He looked around with the curiosity of a healthy hatchling, then made a sound that was part chirp, part electronic hum. Hello there, little guy, I said softly, hardly believing what I was seeing. How are you feeling? In response, Pip stretched his tiny wings, and I swear I could see energy patterns flowing through the membrane like living circuitry. He was no longer just biomechanical. He was something entirely new. The first hybrid dragon, Vextra whispered in awe. Evolved beyond what nature intended. Not beyond, I corrected, watching Pip try to stand on wobbly legs that now sparked with tiny discharges of harmless energy. Just different. Sometimes evolution needs a little help from someone too stubborn to know when to quit. Pip looked at me with those glowing eyes, and made a sound that somehow conveyed gratitude. Then he promptly fell asleep, exhausted from his transformation. So, I said to Vextra, suddenly feeling the weight of what had just happened. I guess we should probably talk about what this means for his future. 3 months later, and my life had become something that would make even the galaxy's best science fiction writers throw up their hands and say, okay, that's just ridiculous. It started small, as these things usually do. Vextra, being a dragon of her word, spread the story of Pip's miraculous recovery through every trade route, cantina, and deep space communication network she could access. She told anyone who would listen about the crazy human mechanic who had saved her youngling with spare parts and sheer stubborn determination. The first to arrive was a crystalline named Zephyr, whose child had developed fractures in their silicon-based neural matrix. Standard medical opinion was that the kid was essentially brain dead, but Zephyr had heard whispers about the dragon whisperer of Epsilon 7 and figured they had nothing left to lose. I fix computers, not crystalline life forms, I protested. But one look at the dimming glow in the young crystalline's core, and I was pulling out my diagnostic equipment again. Turns out, treating a cracked silicon matrix isn't that different from repairing a damaged quantum processor. A little carefully applied molecular welding, some creative rewiring, and 3 days later, little Quartz was chiming happy harmonics and projecting holographic butterflies around my workshop. Word spread faster than a reactor meltdown. Next came a hive-minded collective, whose youngest member had been rejected by the group consciousness due to a genetic mutation. The kid, who called themselves Echo, was essentially a biological radio stuck between stations. I spent a week building them a custom neural amplifier out of communication equipment and old scanner parts. Now Echo translates for 12 different species and runs their own interspecies communication business. Then there was the Molten, whose child was literally cooling to death, a condition that stumped every thermal specialist in 3 sectors. I jerry-rigged a miniature fusion reactor using parts from a coffee machine and a broken hyperdrive. The kid, who goes by Blaze now, keeps my shop warm during the cold cycles, and occasionally helps with welding jobs. My workshop had transformed from a simple repair shop into something between a medical facility and a daycare center for the galaxy's most unusual children. I'd installed specialized equipment for different atmospheric needs, temperature controls that could handle everything from near absolute zero to plasma hot, and more monitoring devices than a space station command center. And through it all, Pip had become my unofficial assistant and translator. His unique hybrid nature allowed him to interface directly with both biological and mechanical systems, making him invaluable for diagnostics. He'd grown from the size of a house cat to about the size of a small dog, his scales now a constantly shifting pattern of colors that reflected his mood and energy levels. "Jake," Pip said one morning, his voice a melodic blend of organic vocals and electronic harmonics, "we have 17 new cases this week. 2 gaseous entities with atmospheric imbalance issues, a quantum being whose probability field is stuck in a negative loop, and 15 various biological mechanical hybrids with integration problems." 17. I groaned, looking at my appointment schedule, which now looked like the manifest for the galaxy's weirdest zoo. What happened to my nice quiet repair shop, where the most complicated thing I dealt with was a broken toaster? "You became the most famous xenobiological engineer in the galaxy without having any actual qualifications," Pip replied with what I'd learned was his version of a grin. "Also, that toaster is still broken. Mrs. Hendricks from Level 7 has been asking about it for 3 months." I looked around my workshop, taking in the specialized medical equipment, the cultural artifacts gifted by grateful alien parents, and the wall of photos showing dozens of young beings I'd helped over the past few months. There was quartz projecting a rainbow, Echo surrounded by a dozen different species, all chattering happily, Blaze showing off a sculpture they'd made from molten metal, and dozens of others. "You know what the really crazy part is?" I said to Pip, watching a young tentacled philosopher use their newly repaired cognitive enhancers to solve mathematical theorems for fun. "I actually love this job. Even though you complain about it constantly," Pip asked, his scales shifting to an amused shade of gold. "Especially because I complain about it constantly," I replied. "Complaining is half the fun." My communication console chimed with an incoming message. I opened it to find a desperate transmission from a mining colony in the Outer Rim. Something about a young metamorphic, whose shape-shifting abilities had gotten stuck halfway between forms, and could the famous miracle mechanic of Epsilon 7 please help? I looked at Pip, who was already warming up the diagnostic equipment with small bursts of controlled plasma from his new energy processing organs. "Well," I said, grabbing my toolkit and wondering what impossible medical challenge awaited us this time, "I guess we better get to work. But I'm going on record as saying this is still the weirdest career change in the history of the galaxy." "Noted and logged," Pip replied cheerfully, his scales brightening to a warm amused blue. "Also, I've taken the liberty of ordering more biocompatible tubing and 3 additional fusion welders. We're going to need them." And you know what? He was absolutely right. Because apparently, when you accidentally become the galaxy's first and only mechanical xenobiologist, business is always booming. Even if you still have no idea what you're actually doing most of the time. But hey, that's what makes it interesting.